Ici, Londres.
There isn't going to be a second Brexit referendum. There really isn't. To see why there isn't, think of all the steps you'd need to take to make one happen. First, you'd need a different parliament. The current House of Commons voted by a stonking majority of 372 to trigger the withdrawal process. So you'd need to persuade 2/3 of MPs to vote for an early dissolution. In other words, you'd need simultaneously to convince a majority of Labour and a majority of Tory MPs that a snap election was in their interests. Then, one of those two big parties would need to fight the election, offering a second referendum. Now, that is completely at odds with what both leaders are currently saying. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn recently came out and said that we would be leaving the customs union on the impeccable grounds that Euro-protectionism is hurting poorer countries. Then, the party that was offering a second referendum would somehow need to win the subsequent general election. Now, bear in mind that at last year's general election, 85% of people voted for parties promising to uphold the result, and all of the parties offering a second poll, the SNP, the Greens and the Lib Dems, lost ground. Then, this putative party that had switched positions and held the election would need to get the legislation through for a second referendum through both parties and then hold and win a second referendum when all of the opinion polls show that the public has not changed its position. And then after all of that, it would need to persuade the other 27 countries to let us stay in on existing terms. In other words, with the rebate, without joining the euro, without having to join the European Army or Schengen. And all of this would need to happen before March of 2018. Now, when you put it like that, you can see that it isn't going to happen. So why this persistent fantasy here that somehow Brexit might just go away? Partly it's wishful thinking. Human beings all have a capacity to see what they want. It's wishful thinking encouraged by those British politicians who keep trooping over to Brussels and holding out the prospect of some kind of reversal. A troop of politicians inexcusably joined recently by Nigel Farage. To the extent that there's any tactic at all, it seems to be to try and make the process so difficult and painful that Britain somehow drops the whole idea. Now, you know, if you're watching this video in Britain, that that isn't going to happen. The danger is that they get the first half of what they want, that it becomes a difficult, awkward transition, and then we leave anyway. And that surely, whichever way you voted, is the worst of all worlds.